Hello, I am Michael Collins and this is Media Focus. In this video, we are going to be looking at another example of texture analysis. Now, the whole purpose of this video is to give you, the A-level media student, an explicit example to use in an exam or an assessment or a mock exam or whatever it is that you're preparing for. Specifically if you are talking about Woman magazine. Now, your teacher will be choosing from a choice of 3 different historical magazines, and the only magazine that I'm going to be looking at in this video is Woman magazine. And the whole purpose of this video is I'm not going to be exploring Woman magazine in general. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on just a single double-page spread. And the reason for this is going to help you make a much more clear point in the exam. And it's also going to help you to get loads more marks as well. The last thing that you want to do in the exam is just go off on one. It's just to rant about the magazine in general. So this is what examiners refer to as an example of common sense. So a common sense answer. So for example, you could flick through Woman magazine, never having seen it before. And then 10 minutes later, you could say, yeah, it's really sexist and it's really old fashioned. And, you know, it's very different from now. Yeah, because it's from 1964. I read that on the cover. And all these things are true, but that would get you 0 marks. And the reason for it is it's not a media studies answer. You're not actually making reference to media studies stuff. What is media studies stuff? It's shot types, it's camera angles. And for magazines and print media in particular, it's things like colour, composition, layout, lexis, language, modes of address. So it's kind of all the stuff that we've been talking about right from the very beginning of the course. So the magazine that we're going to be looking at is Woman magazine. And Woman magazine, a very specific edition of Woman magazine. This is the edition which came out in August 1964. So quite clearly, this came out a very long time ago in a completely different time when values and hegemonic norms were completely different. It's also worth noting that Woman magazine is still being produced today. It's still being sold today. But it was also still being sold in 1964, and it had been going for, I can't remember exactly when it started, but I think at this stage it had already been going for 30 years or thereabouts. So it was already established in 1964. And the double-page spread we're going to be looking at today is the A Present for Your Kitchen double-page spread, which also should look a little bit snazzier on this video presentation because it's in colour. However, if you are going to answer a question on woman in the exam, it's very likely that you're not just going to talk about a present for your kitchen. Please don't do that. Also talk about, for example, the front cover, the Alfred Hitchcock double-page spreads. That'll be another good one. Don't talk about too much stuff, but you're not just going to talk about this double-page spread. Stop ranting and get on with this. So in order to try and keep things as focused as possible, I'm going to try and narrow things down to 2 key questions. And it's not going to be possible just to stick to these 2, but we'll try. So the first key question here is, in what ways does Anchorage manipulate the ways in which audiences respond to this spread? Well, first of all, what is Anchorage? Well, think about a ship. How do ships stop themselves from floating around? That's right, they drop an anchor. It's a big old heavy thing which stops the ship from floating around, which allows it to stay in one place. I'm not an expert on ships. I am an A-level media studies teacher, okay? So we're not talking about ships being kept in one place. We're talking about meaning being kept in one place. Now, if we're to see, I don't know, an image in a magazine and there's no caption, or there's no article beneath it, or there's no headline or, folio or anything at all, then we'll see this image. Let's just say it's a nice image of a dog. And we'll just, I don't know, why is there a dog there? It's a nice dog. Let's say it's an Alsatian. Don't really know. Absolutely no idea, okay? However, if we then include a caption, this is Alfred Hitchcock's dog. And then the headline, Alfred Hitchcock's dog saves baby. And obviously I'm going off on one right now, but the anchorage here is that this dog has been a very, very good boy, right? This dog has saved a kid. If we were to change the caption to Our Asian dog eats child, then of course the meaning would be completely different. And we will have anchored this meaning in a completely different way. It's very, very important for media producers to anchor meaning, to try and keep the meaning in one particular place. Okay? To try and stop the mind of the audience wandering. Because if we don't have anchorage, then as an audience, our mind is going to wander and we'll just start making stuff up. Who's he? Is he a goodie or a baddie? Is he supposed to be hot? Like, I don't know. I'm just going to start making up my own mind. No, we need to be anchored. And in magazines, one of the easiest ways to provide anchorage is through the use of captions underneath images. Now, captions can help to anchor or weigh down the meaning or ideological perspective of the producer. And we're going to look at examples of how this is the case as we go through this video. The next question is kind of related, because all questions in media studies are related to one another. And you might also kind of be thinking at this stage, especially if you're watching this video towards the end of your media studies course, hey, I've done this question so many times now. Well, good. There's only really a few kinds of questions that can actually come up in A-level media studies. So the second is, how are representations of gender encoded in this spread, and how do they reflect the time in which they are made? Now, even if the question doesn't talk or doesn't ask you to talk about the time in which Woman magazine was made, you are still going to be expected to talk about that. Like, that is really, really important, that you are going to have to say that this magazine was released in 1964, where messages, where values, where ideologies, where hegemonic norms were completely different. The ways in which women were treated, the ways in which men were treated, the ways in which children were treated or gay people were treated were completely different back then. Okay? So you are going to have to point that out. Now, a representation is a representation. It is showing something again. So when we see a woman in a magazine, we are not seeing that woman. And this is going to sound quite rude, but that woman kind of doesn't matter, right? The woman in the picture doesn't matter. We don't know who she is in this case. We have absolutely no idea. And frankly, there's no way of knowing as well. She's quite possibly dead. And I know it's quite sad, but what's more important are the women that we see in this double-page spread are a representation. They are being shown again. So what we are seeing is a representation of gender. We are seeing the thoughts, the ideas, the ideology of the producer. This is what the producer of the magazine thinks about women. And hopefully we're going to get very, very quickly, but women were seen in a completely different way in 1964. Okay, so we've gone over a couple of really, really fundamental things. I was going to say basic, but anchorage and representation are anything but basic concepts. And if you need to go over these terms in more detail, if you're thinking, oh, maybe I don't know enough about representation, please, you need to revise this. You must go back to your notes. You must phone a friend, ask your teacher. Okay, because this is fundamental stuff. Let's just recap. Woman and contemporary dominant hegemonic values. Now, contemporary means at the time it was made. Okay, so what was going on at the time it was made? And dominant hegemonic values refers to the values and ideological perspectives which were common in society at the time. For example, there are things that this magazine says quite blatantly that you would not be able to get away with today. But in 1964, it was completely de rigueur. It was completely normal. So this edition was released in 1964. And this set edition of Woman, and this is really, really important, presents a largely simple and straightforward set of values to its target mass market audience. A mass market audience is a big audience. It's a big old market of people buying something. Now, some of the products we've looked at in media studies, to be specific, the magazine Adbusters and the TV show Les Revenants, are actually targeting a small audience or a niche audience of more hardcore fans. But Woman magazine is the total opposite. This is probably the most successful media product that we've looked at. That's probably, it really depends on your definition of success. Black Panther, the Marvel film, well, that sold more tickets, but Woman magazine sold more copies over a much longer period of time, week after week, right? So we've got to consider it like this. Woman magazine was selling 3 million copies a week in the 1960s. Considering that less people were actually living in the United Kingdom at that stage, this is pretty significant. A week of this one magazine. A week. That's crazy. So throughout the magazine, what we see is that Woman magazine is reinforcing patriarchal hegemonic norms. Now, hegemony refers to the rules and restrictions that we follow in society just because. It's a complicated term, but everything that we're doing right now, you're probably, hopefully, wearing clothes right now. Why? Because it's the norm. It would be stupid not to, right? It would be weird not to. That's hegemony. And men and women have, even today, different roles in our society. We know that might not be politically correct, but at the same time, we do know that certain people do have these differing opinions of what men and women should do. This isn't the law. This is hegemony. And we could argue, well, where do these ideas come from? That women should stay at home and cook and look after kids while the man goes out and works. Well, these are patriarchal ideas. Patriarchal hegemonic norms. And these are patriarchal because it's men who have decided that this is the case. So, in case you haven't guessed, this ideology is broadly feminist that we're looking at. So we can ascribe this idea of patriarchal hegemonic norms to a feminist theorist, for example, Judith Butler, Bell Hooks, or most pertinently, Lisbeth Van Zenen. So 3 million copies a week. What we're seeing in this magazine is going to seem quite sexist, right? And it might even be a little offensive. Please do remember that this magazine is very, very old. But we also need to remember that this was the dominant ideology. This wasn't some cringy, sexist, weirdo, creepy magazine, which was, selling a few copies. This was the big business. This was selling 3 million copies every week. So from this, we can easily conclude that these often sexist hegemonic values reflect the dominant ideology of the time it was made. Put simply, this magazine was seen as being normal in 1964. Well, why is that important? If we see representations of women, or of gay people, or black people, or straight people, or Welsh people, or tall people, or short people, or whatever in a media product, well, the first time we see this representation, it doesn't really do much for us. But as Stuart Hall argued, if we keep on seeing these representations over and over again, what happens is that it starts to form a stereotype. And a stereotype is a widely held belief about a certain group of people. So, as a half Irish man who was born in Essex and has lived much of his life jumping between Ireland and Norfolk, I can tell you that one stereotype about Irish people is that they're always drunk. One stereotype about people from Essex is that they're extremely vain and really, really stupid. And I don't even want to say the stereotype about people from Norfolk, but there's quite a lot of unpleasant ones. The issue with these stereotypes is they're not true. You know, I've met wonderfully intelligent people in Essex. You know, I've met, actually, vast majority of people I met in Ireland were not problem drinkers, and most people I've met in Norfolk have been absolutely lovely. So where is it we get this stuff from? Why do we even have stereotypes in the first place? Well, Stuart Hall argued a few different things, that they function as an ordering process, so something to kind of keep our minds together. They function as a shortcut, so we're able to say, oh yeah, he was from Essex. Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, I can see him now. I can, he's got the hair, isn't he? Yep, good. Right. It's not very politically correct. It's not very nice, but stereotypes can help us, but they can also hurt us as well. And as I said, me saying, oh yeah, I was, born in Romford. I was, brought up in Ireland, in Cork. Well, people are already going to start spinning their heads and start thinking about things about me, which is, of course, grossly unfair. So, Woman magazine, by and large, reinforces expectations of gender throughout the magazine. We are going to look at a couple of examples in this double-page spread about how it subverts representations of gender, but this is pretty much what I think you're going to be arguing. Woman magazine reinforces stereotypical representations of gender. So I pinched some examples of representations of women from Lisbeth Van Zeenen's excellent textbook, Feminist Media Studies, which I definitely do recommend you check out if you're interested in taking media studies to the next level. So one female stereotype is that women are homemakers and housewives. They stay at home, they cook and they clean, and they do stuff in the kitchen. And we see this in Woman magazine, in particular the spread that we're going to look at, A Present for Your Kitchen. Van Zeenen also points out that often when we see women in media products, they are young and conventionally pretty, with older women or less hegemonically attractive women generally left out. That's true in Woman magazine, which is perhaps a little bit strange because Woman magazine's target audience, depending on who we look at, is between 30 to 50 or even just 40 plus, i.e. moving up into the middle-aged bracket. And yet, the vast majority of women that we see in Woman magazine are significantly younger than that. This reinforces the ideology that in order to be attractive, women have to be young, often significantly younger than the target audience. One excellent example of that in Woman is the Breeze soap advert, where we see a woman perhaps, in her early 20s, fully nude, very conventionally attractive. We also see this in the RU and A-level beauty double-page spreads, which basically reinforces the idea that in order to be attractive, you have to look like an A-level student or basically an older teenager. Another stereotype of women is that they are defined in relation to their husband or some other man. And we see this a couple of times in Woman magazine. So even though this is Woman, the women's magazine for women, we still see men in the magazine, often reinforcing women. So, for example, in the one-page article, Extra Special on Men, it's kind of a jokey article, but it reinforces the idea that, women should be buying presents for men, women should be looking nice for men, women should be doing this and that in order to snag themselves a man. And also in the Max Factor advert, we see a woman putting on makeup and then almost like a fly buzzing along to a poo. A man buzzes out of nowhere and latches onto the woman So again, defined in relation to their husband or boyfriend. And another stereotype, which Lisbeth Van Zenen points out, is the idea that women are passive, indecisive, and submissive. Like they can't make up their mind and they just give up and give in to people. And we see this on the front cover. And I know this is something that, in my class anyway, we've analysed this front cover a lot. And we've looked at the facial expression of this woman, and she does not look comfortable to be there. She looks a bit nervous. She looks a bit confused. A little bit creepy, to be honest. Not the confident woman that we might see on the front cover of a magazine like Vogue, for example. So, what we're going to be looking at is this double-page spread. So first of all, let's have a quick peek at the codes and conventions. So we have a headline, title, heading, and we also have an array of colour splash images which are blotted around the page. We could pretty much say that this page, this double-page spread layout, follows the Z-line rule, where we start in the top left and then kind of peel around. Actually, though, what I would say is that this is a very cluttered and full-on mode of address. This is very, very different from modern magazines. There's a lot of information here, and to be quite honest, if you do sit down and read all of this, which as media studies students you should do, it's going to take a little while to get through all the information. So this is definitely something that I would write in a response. This is a very cluttered and full-on mode of address, which perhaps assumes that the target audience has plenty of free time to be able to be sitting around reading magazines. This is a very conventional and informative double-page spread. What's the point? What's it even talking about? Well, there are 3 different improvements for your kitchen that you, the middle-aged, working-class, white, heterosexual woman living in 1964, can choose from, ranging from £1 to £20. And remember that this is using pre-decimal money, and I'm not going to go into how much each of these are, but £1 was very little. As £20 would be a fair old whack. So first of all, we have the title, and then we also have the lead-in as well. So a present for your kitchen, 7 ways to improve your kitchen. Edith Blair gives a wise money-saving guide, whether you spend 10 shillings or up to £20. So the whole idea here is potentially appealing to women from a range of socio-economic backgrounds. So again, £20, I'm just going to make up a number here, would be, let's just say, it's very difficult to say, but let's just say £200, right? Not the kind of money you could just splurge right there and then, but maybe it's more actually, I don't know. But it's a fairly significant amount of money, just regardless, just to splurge on your kitchen. So the whole idea is that this article potentially appeals to women from a variety of socio-economic backgrounds. However, right away in the top left, we see the magazine already potentially subverting stereotypical representations. Well, first of all, we see an image of a woman in the kitchen and she's shelling peas. Right away, this is reinforcing stereotypical representations of women, right? There is a woman in the kitchen, she's cooking, and you know what? She's happy about it as well. She is also looking after a son as well. So she is not only a cook, she is also a stereotypical mother as well. So does this reinforce this idea that the kitchen is part of the stereotypical sphere that women should exist in? However, already we kind of see something that subverts it a little bit. And this is the fact that this woman is shelling peas with her son. So rather than a daughter, rather than a friend, rather than just by herself, she appears to be teaching her son to shell peas. So this is quite a subtle piece of what we might refer to as polysemy. Now, polysemy is where a media product has multiple meanings to different audiences. And it may well be that certain audiences might pick up on this and might even see this as being a little bit challenging. She's teaching her son how to shell peas. This is a subversive representation. However, it could also be that this is just reinforcing a stereotypical representation. Like, she's just hanging out with her son. She's just looking after her son. She's just giving her son something to do. This is not an adult man who is doing the cooking. This is not something which is particularly extreme. And this bit here, this paragraph, is essentially talking about the very cheapest improvement that you can pick out, a new tabletop for under 10 shillings, 15 minutes work, and this emphasizes the simplicity for the target female audience. We also see this double-page spread using quite explicit modes of address. So, I'm just going to read out this bit here. Saucepan store for under 15 shillings. Ideal for a kitchen that's so narrow you bang your back bending down. All you need is a series of wood strips. You decide how many. And some masonry pins at 2 shillings 6pence for 4 dozen to fix each strip to the wall. Good idea to fix seal for walls wood strips with polyurethane first to prevent splitting from damp. Then screw the hooks on strips and then you have all your saucepans at your fingertips. Again, we see how the mode of address here has gone a little bit more complicated than you might expect from what I was saying at the start of this video. Now, I've been pointing out that Woman magazine presents a simple and straightforward, dominant ideological perspective to its target audience. But it's treating its target audience essentially like idiots, and yet this is quite complicated stuff. I wouldn't be able to do this at all. Now, maybe that's saying something about me and my DIY skills, but you've got to nip down to B&Q or whatever, buy some wood strips, some masonry pins, 4 dozen of them, wood strips, coating them, sealing them with polyurethane, splitting from damp, hooking them on. Right, okay, that's pretty full-on stuff. So this is DIY. This is, perhaps stereotypically masculine stuff that's going on here. Is this article encouraging the female target audience to get their hands dirty? Is this subverting stereotypical representations of women? Is this a challenging mode of address? Well, this is something you need to decide. However, pretty much straight away, we scroll down a little bit and we see this. A sink for under £10, it's slots so any girl can assemble it quickly. There we go. Already, we see the magazine then reinforcing patriarchal hegemonic ideologies. And there's no kind of umming and ahhing about this. Any girl can assemble it quickly. This is diminutive, this is sexist in a number of different ways. Firstly, we're using the word girl rather than woman. This magazine is targeting adult women aged 30 or 40 plus. And this idea that any girl, as in any woman, can do it reinforces the idea that it's easy and that women essentially should limit themselves to doing easy things. Again, it's a subtle thing. And this kind of comment possibly wouldn't have offended as many people in 1964 as it possibly would do if we released something like this today. In fact, I think a line like this, a throwaway line like this today, would probably be seen as being quite sexist. However, it does reflect the dominant patriarchal hegemonic ideology which was prevalent in 1964, that women had certain skills and roles and ideas and beliefs, and that men had different ones and they did their own thing. And it kind of gets worse as well. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, the printing on this is really bad. But it's the only one we've got. Sliding, already hung, polypropylene sink just in the door frame. Get the man in your life to glue the unit together, then paint it. There we go. So, get the man in your life. Well, it doesn't point out if the man in your life is a husband or a boyfriend, but the assumption here is, one, that you, the woman, can't do this because this is too hard. It's too difficult to glue stuff together. don't know, gluing a unit together kind of sounds a little bit easier than hammering up like masonry pins and stuff, but never mind, I don't know. 2, it's also making the assumption that, while men are good at putting stuff together, women are better at painting stuff, which reinforces this idea that men are blunt instruments while women are much, much better at arts and crafts. But also 3, this is an example of heteronormativity. It doesn't say get the woman in your life, or the man or the woman in your life, or, your lesbian life partner, or, there's no other concessions made here. This is the assumption that the target audience are heterosexual. And it wasn't until the late 1960s that homosexuality was actually decriminalised in the UK. It was kind of vaguely tolerated from a legal perspective. At this stage, in 1964, it was actually completely illegal to have sex with someone who is the same sex as you. So this magazine is very, very much reinforcing the ideology of the time. Get the man in your life to glue this unit together. So the use of lexis here is reinforcing dominant patriarchal hegemonic values. For the next bit, we need to think a little bit about hyperreality. And hyperreality literally means beyond reality. And what this basically means is this idea of a representation which is better than reality. Media studies is all about hyperreality. And quite frankly, in media studies, we are constantly seeing representations which are more real than the thing they're representing, which sounds crazy, which sounds absolutely crazy. This is one of the best examples of hyperreality I've ever seen. So I took this image on holiday in Tokyo, going through Shibuya, which is this absolutely kind of massive, crazy, extremely tall, extremely insane, populated area. I saw this British pub, all kind of bricked out British style text in English. It's even got this British style sign, and it just completely twinged in my head, this idea, this representation of a British pub. Of course I went in there. I had to go in there when it opened, obviously. And it was nothing like a British pub, but at the same time, it was trying to be. It was trying desperately to be this almost kind of magical representation of what a British pub might be. And we see this over and over again in media studies, these representations which are essentially better than the real thing. This is better than any British pub I've ever been in because it was cleaner and it was more, technologically advanced, and it was also right there in the middle of Tokyo as well, and it was also in a basement for some reason as well. So all very, very odd. Hyperreality, though, doesn't just refer to British pubs in Tokyo, but it also refers to pretty much every representation you've ever seen in any media product ever. So towards the beginning of this video, I mentioned that every representation that we see in a media product is just that, a representation. We're not seeing a woman in this image. We are seeing the producer's representation of a woman. This is the ideological perspective of a woman. This is, for the producer, if you will, the perfect woman. And what is she doing? Well, she's washing up. So we can see the mise en scène. We can see the use of costume, blah, 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 blah. Yep, she's washing up. She's leaning over the sink, except she's not washing up. If she was washing up, she would have her back to the camera. And if she had her back to the camera, then we wouldn't be able to see her face and we wouldn't be able to see that she was hegemonically attractive. We also wouldn't be able to see her dress. We also wouldn't be able to see her smile. We also wouldn't be able to see the mise en scène of her curled hair either. So why? What's going on here? Well, it's quite simple. This is a perfect reality. This is hyper-reality. This is way, way better than real life. Washing up sucks. Washing up is boring. Washing up is gross. Washing up is, oh God, is it over yet? Yet this woman, not only does she love washing up, but also she looks extremely glamorous as she's washing up. She's not wearing an apron or anything like that. She's wearing, for 1964, pretty kind of cool and fashionable dress. She looks like she'd probably be more at home in a nightclub than she would in a kitchen. But she's not bemoaning her miserable life. She's genuinely happy to be here. Now, this reinforces this notion, but essentially a woman's place is in the kitchen. This reinforces this patriarchal, dominant, ideological perspective. Now, we need to think very carefully about why this is the case. Why is Woman magazine so intent on reinforcing these very basic ideas? Like, we think about what was going on in the 1960s. Well, quite frankly, sex and drugs and rock and roll. And we were also leading up to kind of many kind of female emancipation rallies and things like that. Feminism starting to get more and more traction. And yet Woman magazine presents women as, quite frankly, extremely boring and dull people who seem to only be happy putting on makeup and doing dishes. Well, why? Why is it that Woman magazine is doing this? Why is there no article on contraception or burning bras? The reason for this is, well, it all comes down to money. If the producers of Woman magazine can construct an audience of, sorry to say it, basic, straightforward, working class women, then these same basic, straightforward working class women will buy the magazine week after week. So this is a process called constructing audiences. But it's also a process called cultivation. And George Gerbner talked about this quite a lot. If we keep on showing the same ideological perspective to an audience over and over again, then, well, over a period of time, they start to believe it. If we keep on showing women in this domestic setting over and over and over and over and over again, then this reinforces the ideological perspective that this is right, that this is good, that this is natural. Now, audiences have an opportunity to negotiate this image. And the female target audiences reading this can either read the preferred reading and can agree with the ideological perspective. Wow, she looks really happy. God, I could be a glamorous woman washing up in my kitchen. There's nothing wrong with being a glamorous woman washing up in your kitchen, by the way. Let me just point that out. Or they might reject this message. They might see this and they might say, well, okay, there's something going on here. This is brainwashing. This is corruption. This is destruction of womankind by continually reinforcing women in this problematic and damaging context. And that would be an example of the oppositional reading, so opposing the dominant ideology there. And as time goes on, we started to see more of this oppositional reading going on. And Woman magazine had to change quite dramatically in order to fit into modern mainstream society. And if you read the magazine today, it's still very similar, but at the same time not quite as straightforward and frighteningly sexist as Woman magazine from 1964. Yeah, that is it. Thank you very much.